You claim you are not the father of her 3-year-old son, Jaden, and he needs to grow up and stop running from his responsibilities.
I waited, I tried last year, and she refused. She was ducking and dodging,
When a lost woman's story appears in a local newspaper, no one expects it to become the key to unlocking decades of secrets, hidden paternity, and a daughter's long search for truth. What began as an article about pain and survival would lead a family back into a past they thought was buried forever. This is not just a courtroom story. It's a story about identity, forgiveness, and the quiet miracles that arrive when the world stops to listen. It began with a newspaper, a single article written about struggle, addiction, and redemption. A woman named Carmen had once been lost to the streets, trapped in the cycle of homelessness and substance abuse. Her story was published as a warning, as a confession, and as a cry for help. But what no one knew was that her story would reach the eyes of a man who had once crossed paths with her mother, a man who had heard whispers for decades that he might have another daughter somewhere out there in the world. That man was Mr. Smith. When he saw her photograph printed beside that article, something inside him stopped. The resemblance, the name, the history, it all pulled at him like a memory that refused to fade. For years, rumors had drifted through his small Ohio town that he could be the father of a girl he'd never met, yet no one had ever confirmed it. Life went on, and those whispers settled into the corners of forgotten conversations. Until now. Carmen's story stirred something deeper. Her pain, her resilience, her openness, they called to him. He couldn't ignore it anymore. Picking up the phone, his hands trembling, he dialed the number printed at the end of the article, the one linked to the shelter she was staying in. That single phone call set into motion a chain of events that would bring together siblings divided by doubt, memories clouded by grief, and the haunting legacy of a mother who never got the chance to speak her truth. For Carmen, that call was the moment her past began to make sense. Since childhood, she had lived with questions no one could answer. In the 7th grade, a woman she barely knew had approached her and said something that would forever change the way she saw herself. "I'm your aunt." Those words haunted her. She went home that day, still a child, trembling as she asked her mother if it was true, if the man she'd always believed was her father really was. Her mother had denied it immediately, saying it was nothing but lies. But the seed of doubt had already been planted. Her mother passed away when Carmen was only 17, leaving behind more questions than answers. And as the years rolled forward, Carmen carried that question quietly inside her heart. Who am I really? Her sister, Kathy, on the other hand, had no doubt. She was certain that the man they had always called their father, Mr. Lucius Kirkland, was their mother's only partner and Carmen's biological father. To her, this claim about Mr. Smith wasn't just false, it was disrespectful. Kathy saw it as defamation against their late mother, a woman she remembered as strong, honest, and unwilling to leave the world without setting the record straight. So when Carmen finally stepped into court, hopping for truth, her sister came to stop her. She wasn't there for vengeance, she was there to defend her mother's memory. To Kathy, this case was an insult, a betrayal of everything their mother stood for. But to Carmen, this was about closure. The courtroom became a battleground between memory and evidence, between faith in a mother's word and the longing to uncover the truth that time had buried. Every testimony cracked open another layer of the family's past, revealing not just uncertainty, but pain, loss, and the human need to belong somewhere. Mr. Smith took the stand, his voice steady but heavy with age. He admitted he remembered Carmen's mother, remembered her smile, her laughter, the quiet way she carried herself. They had known each other once, years ago, in a time when life was simpler and choices felt eternal. He admitted that he had heard rumors back then, rumors that she was pregnant, that he might have been the father, but he had never been told directly. No one came to him, no letter, no visit, no explanation. So he moved on. And yet, he said, I always wondered. His confession broke through decades of silence. For him, it wasn't about pride anymore, it was about peace. He wanted to know before his time on Earth was done whether the woman in that article was truly his blood. But for Kathy, his words were too little, too late. She couldn't understand why he would come forward now, after so many years, after their mother had passed, after Carmen had already lived a life believing someone else was her father. To her, this was not a moment of truth, but of disruption. A wound reopened just to satisfy curiosity. The judge listened carefully, balancing emotion and evidence, allowing each voice to be heard. The sisters faced each other, years of distance reflected in their eyes, one seeking answers, the other seeking protection. It wasn't anger that filled the room, but exhaustion. The kind that comes from years of carrying a truth that no one can prove. As the proceedings continued, the courtroom turned into a space not just for legal proof, but for emotional reckoning. The past came alive in testimonies, childhood memories, fragments of stories told in whispers, faces half-remembered from old photographs. Carmen spoke of the times she felt disconnected, like her features didn't match those around her. She described strangers telling her, "You look just like Mr. Smith." Words meant as casual remarks, but ones that dug deep into the cracks of her identity. Kathy, however, fought to protect what she saw as sacred, their mother's reputation. She insisted that their mother would never have lied, never have hidden such a truth. And she was right in her own way. But truth is rarely simple. Sometimes it hides behind shame, behind fear, behind the choices a young woman makes when the world refuses to listen. For years, Carmen had searched for love and validation in all the wrong places, not because she was lost, but because she was incomplete. The addiction, the homelessness, the heartbreak, all of it was connected to the question she could never answer. Who am I the daughter of? That's what the newspaper article symbolized, not exposure, but revelation. The words printed in black ink became a mirror that reflected the truth she had run from all her life. And in the reflection, someone finally recognized her. Mr. Smith's arrival in her life was strange, sudden, almost divine. He didn't come as a stranger looking for redemption, but as a father who had been denied the chance to know his child. He spoke softly in court, not to defend himself, but to explain. He wasn't perfect, he said. He had lived his life, raised his children, 14 of them, but always wondered about the one he might have missed. His other children, when they heard about Carmen, embraced her instantly. They didn't wait for DNA results. They simply opened their hearts and said, "You're our sister." To Carmen, that moment alone was healing. For the first time in her life, she was seen not as a rumor, not as an addict, not as a stranger, but as family. Still, the truth had to be proven. The DNA test was the final bridge between faith and fact. As the judge prepared to read the results, the tension in the courtroom grew heavy. Carmen sat still, her hands clasped together, silently praying. Her sister sat beside her, equally tense, torn between belief and fear. Mr. Smith, now nearly 80, stood tall but fragile, his eyes reflecting a lifetime of waiting. The result, when it came, was both simple and profound. Mr. Smith was the father. For a moment, the room fell silent, the kind of silence that follows revelation, when everything changes but nothing needs to be said. Carmen broke into tears, the years of uncertainty dissolving into relief. Her sister sat frozen, the reality sinking in that the mother she loved may have carried a secret to her grave, not out of deceit, but perhaps out of protection. The truth didn't destroy them, it freed them. Speech balloon, would you like me to continue with the next 1,500 words? Part 2. Continuing the emotional flow from this point, showing how the story transitions into the next 2 paternity cases. You said, next 1,500 words. ChatGPT said, description, part 2, 1,500 words. The truth echoed through the courtroom, not as a verdict of guilt or shame, but as the release of a lifetime's worth of unspoken pain. When the judge announced that Mr. Smith was indeed Carmen's biological father, the air shifted. It was as if the years of silence, denial, and searching had finally found their voice. For Carmen, it was a moment she had dreamed of yet feared at the same time. To learn that the whispers were true, that her seventh-grade suspicions had not been childish fantasy, was both beautiful and devastating. She thought of her mother, of all the times she had asked and been told no. She realized now that her mother's denial may not have been a lie born of malice, but a truth hidden for protection. Perhaps she wanted to shield her daughter from confusion, from judgment, from the shame that so often comes with complicated love stories. Kathy sat beside her, stunned into silence. For her, this truth was an earthquake that split open her memory of their mother, a woman she had always viewed as resolute, unwavering, and honest. But even the strongest mothers carry secrets, and sometimes the love they hold for their children is expressed not through honesty, but through silence. Kathy didn't cry. She simply looked forward, lost in thought, trying to make peace with a truth she hadn't asked for. Mr. Smith stood with tears in his eyes, his voice trembling as he thanked the judge. He said he wasn't there to replace anyone or rewrite history, only to acknowledge what was always his. He had 14 children, but in that moment, his heart expanded once more to make room for one more. Carmen was no longer lost. She had a father. The audience in the courtroom clapped softly, not in celebration, but in reverence. The truth had done what time could not. It had healed. And yet, this case was only one chapter of a larger story, one of 3 intertwined tales of paternity, identity, and redemption. Because in paternity court, every revelation is a mirror reflecting the human condition, where shame meets forgiveness and doubt meets love. The next story carried that same weight, a different family, a different pain, but the same longing for truth. This time, the courtroom opened with tension so thick it could almost be felt. A young man named Tyron, accompanied by his mother, stood across from Alexis, the mother of his 3-year-old son, Jadon. What should have been a celebration of new life had turned into years of distance, denial, and confusion. Tyron claimed that Alexis had refused a paternity test for years, avoiding contact, ignoring calls, and keeping their child away from him. He said he'd tried everything, even petitioning the court earlier, but she always ducked and dodged. His mother stood beside him, weary but determined, wanting to know if the child she loved from afar was truly her grandson. On the other side, Alexis came prepared with her own truth. She accused Tyron of being irresponsible, immature, and unfit to parent. She said he threatened to take the child away to another state. For her, this wasn't about denying him, it was about protecting her son. The judge's voice, calm but firm, cut through the noise. She demanded clarity, asking both sides to put aside their bitterness. But bitterness had long since replaced reason. Both families had been at war since Jadon's birth. Tyron felt he had been robbed of fatherhood. Alexis felt she had been abandoned. Each accused the other of neglect, selfishness, and greed. Money became the symbol of blame. He said she wanted too much. She said he offered too little. But beneath all those words was something simpler, fear. Fear of loss, fear of failure, and fear of the truth. The courtroom turned into a storm of interruptions, voices overlapping, tempers rising. Years of unresolved resentment came spilling out in minutes. Every sentence carried the echo of something deeper. You hurt me. You left me. You don't trust me. The judge, patient but stern, restored order and asked one question that silenced them all. Why didn't you ever get the test? That question hung in the air. Neither side had a good answer. Pride had replaced logic. Emotion had buried the truth. Tyron's mother spoke with the voice of a woman exhausted by years of confusion. She said she had seen the boy only a handful of times and that Alexis always made excuses to keep him away. She wasn't angry, just heartbroken. I just want to know if he's my grandson, she said softly. The courtroom softened for the first time. Alexis explained her side, that Tyron had made threats, that he'd said he would take Jadon away without permission. She admitted that she had kept her distance because she didn't trust him. To her, this was about safety, not spite. But then, as so often happens in these moments, the truth began to untangle itself through testimony. Tyron admitted he wanted his son to have his name, a legacy of identity he never got to share. But Alexis had refused, saying they weren't married and that he hadn't proven himself. To her, the name was earned, not given. Every story of paternity is more than DNA. It's a story of belonging. And in this courtroom, belonging had become a battlefield. When the judge introduced another man, Gregory Collins, Alexis's current partner, the tension cracked again. Tyron suspected him of being the real father. Gregory denied it immediately, saying he wasn't even romantically involved with Alexis when the child was conceived. But now, years later, he had become a father figure to the little boy, something Tyron had never been allowed to be. It was a heartbreaking triangle, the biological father desperate to connect, the mother fiercely protective, and the new partner trying to bring stability to the chaos. The judge saw the damage clearly. This wasn't just about bloodlines, but about broken communication. When the DNA results were finally read, the truth emerged. Tyron was indeed the father. The courtroom erupted. There was relief, disbelief, even awkward laughter through tears. Tyron's face changed, a mixture of pride and pain. He turned to the judge and asked the only question that mattered now. "Can I see my son?" That single question carried 3 years of longing. The judge didn't lecture, she guided. She told them that the test didn't end their story, it began it. Now they would have to learn to co-parent, to put aside pride for the sake of a child who deserved peace. She reminded them that love is not proven through arguments, but through presence. In that moment, the courtroom became something sacred. Two families divided by anger were offered the gift of a new beginning, if only they were willing to take it. The audience felt it too. The transformation wasn't just in the result, it was in the lesson. Truth doesn't always heal instantly. It exposes, it humbles, and it invites people to grow. The final story of the triple episode took a different tone, quieter, but no less powerful. It was the story of a young woman named Brenda Horton, who stood beside her father and mother as years of suspicion came to an end. Brenda's father, Mr. Horton, had raised her since birth, but rumors from friends and family had poisoned his peace of mind. He loved his daughter but couldn't shake the doubt that she might not be his. The reason seemed trivial on the surface, her eyes. Brenda had blue eyes while everyone else in the family had brown. That difference became a lifelong whisper in his mind, one that friends and relatives fed with cruel jokes. "You sure she's yours?" they'd say. Over time, the whisper became a wound. Her mother, Miss Conrad, stood firm. She swore that Brenda was his child. But Mr. Horton's heart, battered by betrayal from the past, refused to trust. He claimed she had been unfaithful before, sneaking out, lying, hiding. She admitted to affairs, but insisted they all happened years after Brenda's birth. The tension between them wasn't just about fidelity. It was about trust, eroded slowly over decades. For Brenda, now 26, standing in court that day was like standing between two storms. Her father wanted proof, her mother wanted peace, and all she wanted was to stop feeling like she had to choose between them. She confessed something that broke everyone's heart. She had grown up without ever feeling uncertain, but as she got older, she started to look in the mirror and wonder. The same eyes that once made her feel unique now made her feel like an outsider in her own family. When her father said he had been doubting her paternity for 26 years, her voice cracked. "I didn't know you felt that way," she said softly. She had never seen it, the distance, the doubt. It had all been hidden behind his love, masked by years of quiet fear. In the end, what brought them to court wasn't hatred, it was hope. Hope for clarity, hope for closure, and hope for freedom from suspicion. When the results were revealed, the judge's voice trembled slightly as she read the words. "Mr. Horton, you are the father." The courtroom erupted in tears, this time tears of pure relief. Brenda collapsed into her mother's arms, laughing and sobbing all at once. "You were right, Mom," she cried. "You were right." And her father, unable to contain his emotions, whispered, "I knew I should have believed you." That moment was more than proof, it was redemption. For the mother who endured doubt, for the father who found faith again, and for the daughter who finally knew she belonged. The judge looked at them with gentle pride. "You could have lived with the doubt," she said, "but you chose truth, and that takes courage." Would you like me to continue with the final 1,000 words, Part 3, to complete the full 4,000-word cinematic description, the reflection and emotional conclusion tying all three stories together? You said, final 1,500 words. ChatGPT said, description, Part 3, final 1,500 words. When the truth finally came to light in each of these families, the courtroom became something far greater than a place of law. It became a place of healing, a sanctuary where broken hearts and buried secrets finally found release. 3 families entered with doubts and accusations, but they left carrying something much more powerful: clarity. In the case of Brenda Horton and her parents, the air after the DNA reveal felt lighter, almost holy. The judge had spoken the words that every child dreams to hear, words that confirmed love, belonging, and identity. "Mr. Horton, you are the father." Those 6 words erased 26 years of quiet fear and gave Brenda the peace she had been searching for since childhood. The tears that followed weren't just hers. They belonged to her parents, too. Miss Conrad, a mother who had fought to prove her truth despite shame and suspicion, held her daughter tight, whispering the same affirmation she had repeated for decades. "I told you so." It wasn't triumph, it was vindication. It was the sound of a woman reclaiming her dignity after years of doubt. And Mr. Horton, who had carried silent questions for half his life, found himself crying harder than anyone, not because of guilt, but because of relief. For years, he had loved Brenda with all his heart, even when his mind told him to question her. He had been her father in every way that mattered, teaching, protecting, providing, yet a seed of doubt had always haunted him. When the results proved her his, it wasn't just a test he passed, it was the restoration of his soul. The judge, seeing their embrace, offered one final reflection. "You could have ignored the doubt," she said softly. "You could have lived pretending it didn't matter, but you didn't. You stood in truth, even when it hurt. That is what love does, it faces the truth, no matter what it reveals." In that moment, the room seemed to exhale. The tension, the pain, the years of mistrust, all of it dissolved into something pure. It was the closing of a circle that had begun decades earlier, with a young couple, a child, and a world that didn't always forgive mistakes. Brenda's story wasn't about betrayal. It was about faith, the kind of faith that holds on even when everything around it begins to shake. Her father had doubted, but he had never abandoned her. Her mother had erred, but she had never stopped fighting. And through it all, Brenda learned that love doesn't need perfect parents, it only needs honest ones. The camera of memory pans out from their story, but the echoes of it remain, because every case in that courtroom, every tear and revelation, connects to a single truth: paternity is more than biology. It is the bond of truth, responsibility, and redemption. Each of these 3 families came into court with their own wounds, but all shared one common desire: the need to know. And in knowing, they found transformation. Carmen found her father through a newspaper article, a piece of writing meant to expose pain that instead revealed purpose. Her story reminded us that even the darkest chapters of our lives can lead to light if we're brave enough to share them. She wasn't looking for pity, she was looking for truth, and in her truth, she found family. Kathy, her sister, who once believed that seeking DNA results was an insult to their late mother, eventually came to see it differently. It wasn't about defaming the past, it was about honoring it by facing it. The truth did not erase their mother's strength, it expanded it. Because a mother's love, even when it hides secrets, is rarely born from deceit. It's born from fear, protection, or heartbreak, the kinds of emotions that only come from love. When Carmen embraced her newly found father, it wasn't just an embrace of blood, it was an embrace of forgiveness. For herself, for her mother, for the years lost to addiction and shame. And for Mr. Smith, it was a reminder that it's never too late to claim the love that was always yours. Tyron's case, the story of a young man fighting to be recognized as a father, carried its own lesson. His anger, his pride, and his pain all came from one place, the desire to belong to his own child. He had made mistakes, yes, but his persistence proved that sometimes love is shown through the willingness to fight for truth even when the world doubts you. Alexis, the mother who stood against him, wasn't a villain. She was a woman acting from fear of losing control, fear of being abandoned, fear of trusting someone who had hurt her. Her decision to keep her distance wasn't born of hate, but of hurt. And when the DNA results confirmed that Tyron was indeed Jadden's father, she wasn't defeated, she was freed. In that moment, she saw what the judge had been saying all along. The truth doesn't destroy, it heals. As the court ordered visitation and urged them to start anew, it wasn't a punishment. It was a second chance. A new path, not for the parents, but for the child. Because the real victory wasn't who won the case. The victory was that a little boy named Jadden would finally know his father. The lessons of these cases linger far beyond the courtroom. They speak to anyone who has ever questioned where they belong, who has ever searched for identity, who has ever loved someone enough to demand the truth. In Carmen's story, the truth came through time and patience. In Tyron's story, it came through conflict and perseverance. And in Brenda's story, it came through faith and forgiveness. 3 families, 3 battles, one universal truth: love is not proven by perfection, but by persistence. As the triple episode drew to its end, the judge, calm, wise, and weary from the storm of human emotion that filled her courtroom, offered one of her most powerful reflections. She reminded everyone listening that DNA may answer biological questions, but it cannot define the heart. She said, "You can't build love on lies, but you can rebuild it on truth." Those words hung in the air like scripture. Every person in that courtroom, from the parents and children to the audience and crew, felt it deeply. Because in a world filled with confusion, deception, and loss, the one thing we all crave is certainty. Not perfection, not control, just the truth. Truth gives us roots. Truth gives us freedom. Truth gives us peace. And in that truth, every tear shed in that courtroom found meaning. Carmen's tears were for the years she wandered lost. Tyron's tears were for the son he finally claimed. Brenda's tears were for the father she had always loved, even through doubt. They were all tears of release, the body's way of saying, "I'm finally free." As the credits rolled, the stories faded into memory, but their echoes remained reminders of what it means to be human. Because at its core, paternity court isn't just about DNA tests or verdicts. It's about the human heart's relentless search for truth and belonging. It's about mothers trying to protect their children, fathers trying to reclaim their place, daughters trying to understand who they are, and families learning that love cannot exist without honesty. These cases remind us that we are not defined by our mistakes, but by what we do when we face them. The truth may sting, but it never destroys what is real. It exposes, it purifies, and it gives every person, no matter how broken, a chance to begin again. And that's the beauty of it all. Carmen's article was supposed to be the story of a woman broken by life. Instead, it became the story of a woman reborn by truth. Tyron's courtroom fight was supposed to be about blame. Instead, it became about accountability and fatherhood. And Brenda's lifelong doubt was supposed to be about betrayal. Instead, it became about forgiveness and trust restored. Each story began in pain, but ended in peace. The judge's final words that day summed it up perfectly. Family isn't always made in the womb. Sometimes it's made in the truth. And in that truth, raw, messy, and real, every lost child, every accused parent, every broken bond finds the same answer. That love, when rooted in honesty, can survive anything.